The Galactic Council, composed of the galaxy's most powerful and ancient alien species, sat in their vast council chamber, their expressions cold and unyielding. Humanity, a fledgling race still considered primitive by galactic standards, had made a mistake, an accidental incursion into sacred alien territory. The Council demanded retribution, the terms clear: immediate war. The weight of their decision was crushing, and the tension in the room was palpable. Marcus Hale, the human diplomat chosen to represent Earth, stood at the forefront of the chamber. A former soldier scarred by his past, he had spent years navigating the intricate web of intergalactic politics. He had faced impossible odds before, but nothing like this. The Galactic Council was a force beyond anything humanity had faced, and they were poised to launch a devastating war over an accidental violation. War against humanity. He could feel the weight of the human race's survival on his shoulders, but there was no room for hesitation. "You speak of peace," the Zarthian representative, Zarnak, sneered. "Yet your species trespassed onto territory sacred to us. We will not tolerate such insolence." Marcus took a deep breath, holding his composure. "I understand your anger, but this was a mistake. A misunderstanding, one that we are committed to rectifying. We offer compensation, an apology, and most importantly, peace." His voice was steady, but beneath the calm, he knew he was facing an enemy more interested in war than diplomacy. "Let us work together to find a solution." The council members murmured among themselves, their gazes turning toward the Zarthian representative. Zarnak's eyes narrowed, clearly seeking blood. The call for war was already in motion, but Marcus wasn't about to let this be the end. He had seen what war could do, had seen entire worlds torn apart, and he refused to allow humanity to be dragged into such destruction. "I have seen the strength of my people," Marcus continued, his words measured, "and I know what we're capable of. But I also know that we would rather die than see another war. Peace is our goal, and we ask for your understanding, for your patience." He looked into the eyes of the council members, some of whom seemed to be swayed, while others remained resolute in their demand for conflict. But Marcus wasn't blind. The Zarthians were pushing harder than anyone else, their power within the council undeniable. He sensed there was more to this than just the incursion, a deeper, more insidious plan at play. As the session wore on, the weight of the Zarthians' influence became clear. They weren't merely advocating for justice. They were exploiting the situation for their own gain, using humanity as a convenient scapegoat for something much larger. The Council's unity was crumbling under the strain of these ulterior motives. The tension in the room mounted, and Marcus began to doubt his ability to win this battle. His mind raced, and he retreated into his thoughts. He knew the stakes. War meant destruction. It meant a slaughter of innocent lives. It meant everything he had fought against during his military service. But he also knew that giving up now would seal humanity's fate. He watched Zarnak's every move, his every word, studying the alien's subtle cues. It wasn't just about words anymore. It was about understanding the deeper game being played. Marcus, the seasoned negotiator, realized something was amiss. The Council's demand for war wasn't rooted solely in the incident. It wasn't about justice. It was about power. The Zarthians had a long-standing agenda: to gain dominance over certain territories, to reshape the balance of power. The human race, by accident, had become a convenient pawn in their grand scheme. It wasn't the violation of sacred territory that had angered them. It was the opportunity for war that they saw, the chaos they could manipulate to expand their influence. The realization hit Marcus like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about justice, it was about control. His years of experience in negotiation and warfare had prepared him for this moment. Marcus knew the stakes had just grown infinitely higher. This wasn't just a diplomatic failure on humanity's part, it was a galactic conspiracy. The Council's demand for war had become a tool in a much larger play for power, and the Zarthians were at its heart. With this new knowledge, Marcus adjusted his approach. His mind raced as he formulated a plan. It wasn't enough to argue peace on the surface. He needed to expose the true motives of the Council's most powerful faction without directly accusing them. That would only lead to more hostility, and war would be inevitable. He began to strategically plant seeds of doubt. Are we truly reacting to a violation, or is something more insidious at play here? He asked, his voice low but steady. There are those among you who stand to gain far more than any of us from this conflict. The council members shifted uneasily, and Marcus could feel the subtle shift in the room. Some began to glance at each other, their earlier unity splintering. His words had landed. The Zarthians' power was undeniable, but now, the seeds of suspicion had been sown. Marcus wasn't here just to talk about peace. He was here to expose the conspiracy and stop the war before it started. In the quiet that followed, Marcus's eyes locked with Zarnok's. The Zarthian's expression remained stone cold, but Marcus could see the flicker of something else, something hidden beneath the surface. The diplomatic game had shifted, and Marcus had just gained the upper hand. The final round of negotiations was intense. Marcus knew the council's decision would come soon, but he also knew that war wasn't inevitable, not if he had anything to say about it. As the debate continued, he kept his focus sharp, watching for the moment when he could strike the final blow. He confronted the council with the truth, piecing together the subtle moves made by the Zarthians. You've been manipulated, Marcus declared. And I can prove it. This is about power, nothing more. War with humanity is just a means to an end for those who wish to reshape the galaxy. The council members were now divided. Some of them, seeing the truth in Marcus's words, began to rally against the war. Others, whose loyalty had been swayed by the Zarthians, stood firm in their demand. But the tide was turning. The Zarthians were now under scrutiny, their plans laid bare for all to see. In the end, the council was forced to acknowledge the truth. War was avoided, and humanity's place in the galaxy was solidified, not by force, but by the strength of Marcus Hale's resolve. Humanity had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, it could stand its ground and change the course of galactic politics. The council had seen what Marcus had known all along: humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their weapons or their technology. It was in their ability to think differently, to challenge the status quo, and to fight for peace when all seemed lost. The human diplomat had not blinked. And in that moment, humanity's future in the galaxy was no longer in doubt. Marcus Hale stood in the heart of the council chamber, staring at the formidable faces of the Galactic Council. Representatives from the most advanced alien species in the galaxy were gathered, their expressions unyielding. The Zarthians, the most influential race, had been the first to demand war. Their disdain for humanity was palpable, and Marcus could feel their hatred in every word they spoke. They accused humanity of violating sacred territory, an accident, a misunderstanding, but to them, an unforgivable offense. The chamber was thick with tension. Marcus had expected the demand for war, but the venom with which the council condemned humanity caught him off guard. His thoughts raced as he prepared his response. His mind wandered briefly to the countless wars he had seen and fought in during his younger years. His body still bore the scars of those battles, but his heart and mind had grown tired of violence. He had seen too much, lost too many, and this time, he wasn't going to let it happen again. I understand your anger, Marcus began, his voice steady but firm. But this incident was a misunderstanding. Humanity has always sought peace with other species. We were not aware of the significance of the territory we entered. We offer our deepest apologies, and we are willing to make reparations. He paused, letting the words sink in, but he could feel the resistance building already. He knew the council wasn't interested in peace. They wanted retribution. You think apologies will suffice? Zarnok, the Zarthian representative, growled. His cold, reptilian eyes narrowed. You dare insult us with your feeble excuses? He pointed a clawed finger toward Marcus. Your people trespassed where none are allowed, and you expect us to simply forgive you? Marcus steadied himself. He dealt with Zarnok before. His arrogance was as predictable as it was dangerous. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but for understanding. Humanity does not wish to provoke war, especially with a race as powerful as the Zarthians. His tone remained even, measured. We would rather resolve this through diplomacy, through dialogue. The room erupted in murmurs. Some council members seemed uneasy, glancing toward Zarnak, while others remained silent, as if unsure where their allegiances lay. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty, but Marcus wasn't fooled. He knew war was on the table, and the Zarthians were only the tip of the iceberg. Other factions in the council, hungry for power, saw this as an opportunity to weaken humanity, to test its resolve. Zarnak wasn't the only one who saw humanity as a threat, though not for the reasons he believed. The galaxy was full of alien species that had grown complacent in their dominance, and they feared the rise of a race that was still young, still unpredictable. Humanity's potential was both a challenge and a threat. But Marcus understood that this was more than just an accident. It was a calculated move by some factions within the council to drive humanity into a war they couldn't win. As the debate wore on, Marcus's mind shifted from defense to offense. He realized that traditional diplomacy would not be enough. He had to expose the deeper conspiracy that was being played against humanity. The Zarthians, and others like them, weren't fighting for justice. They were manipulating the situation to their own advantage. War was the goal, not peace. But how could he reveal this without causing even more chaos? He listened closely as the arguments intensified. The Zarthians continued to argue their case, citing the need for swift and brutal punishment. But it wasn't their anger that struck Marcus, it was their strategic positioning. Zarnak had been the loudest, the most vocal, but he wasn't the only one pushing for war. The other members of the council were divided, each one with their own motivations. Marcus knew he had to act fast before the council's decision became final. At that moment, an idea struck him. Marcus leaned forward, speaking not to Zarnak, but to the entire council. The real question we should ask ourselves is not whether humanity deserves punishment. The question is why some of you seem so eager to jump to war. His voice was low, laced with calculated calm. Are you truly reacting to the violation of sacred territory, or is there something else at play here? The room fell silent. Marcus could feel the shift, the uncertainty rippling through the council. He had planted the seed of doubt. He could see some of the more neutral members of the council beginning to reconsider their positions, their expressions now questioning, unsure. This was his opening. Let's consider the broader picture, Marcus continued, his eyes scanning the room. This war could benefit more than just those seeking justice. It could benefit those with ambitions of expansion, those who wish to manipulate the situation for their own gain. This is not just about an incident, this is about power. He paused, letting his words linger. There are those among us who seek to use this conflict as a means to shift the balance of power in the galaxy. And they will use you, all of you, to do so. The tension in the room was palpable. Some council members shifted uncomfortably, while others exchanged glances. Marcus could see that his words were landing. They weren't just questioning the human actions anymore, they were questioning the motives of those calling for war. He had done it. He had made them doubt. Zarnak, however, was not so easily swayed. His eyes locked onto Marcus's, filled with fury. You think you can manipulate us with your words? Zarnak hissed. You are nothing but a tool of a species too weak to understand the consequences of their actions. Marcus didn't flinch. Maybe. Or maybe I'm the one who sees the bigger picture. Maybe I'm the one who understands that peace, real peace, is worth more than all the power you seek to gain. He stood tall, his voice unwavering. And maybe, just maybe, you're the ones who have underestimated humanity. The council was divided. The debate continued, but now there was a palpable shift. The factions in favor of war were no longer unified, and those who had remained neutral were starting to question their allegiances. Marcus's careful manipulation had worked. He had exposed the true motives of the Zarthians and others, and now they were on the defensive. As the negotiations reached their climax, Marcus pushed forward. We don't need to fight. We don't need war. What we need is honesty, transparency, and cooperation. If we allow ourselves to be manipulated, then we have lost before the war even begins. He stared down each representative, his gaze unflinching. The tension was thick, but as Marcus had hoped, the tide had turned. The Council's demand for war was no longer as clear-cut as it had been. The Zarthians had been exposed for what they were, manipulators seeking to use this conflict for their own gain. And while there were still those who wished to see humanity punished, the balance had shifted. The war was no longer inevitable. Marcus didn't wait for the final vote. He knew the Council was now divided, and the Zarthians had lost their leverage. The room erupted into heated discussions, but Marcus had already won. The war was averted. Humanity had not only survived but had made its mark in the galaxy. By thinking outside the box, by exposing the truth, Marcus had shown the galaxy that humanity could stand its ground. And as the dust settled, Marcus knew one thing for certain: humanity had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, it could find a way to win without resorting to violence. Humanity had shown its true strength, not through force, but through the power of diplomacy, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. The mood in the Galactic Council chamber had shifted dramatically. Tension hung heavy in the air, the usual calm replaced by an undercurrent of suspicion. Marcus Hale, though outwardly calm, could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. His mind raced as he processed the realization that the war demanded by the Council wasn't about the violation of sacred space. It was part of something much larger. Something darker. Marcus had carefully placed the seed of doubt in the minds of the Council members, but now he needed to dig deeper. The Zarthians, with their fierce desire for power, were at the center of this. They weren't merely using humanity as an excuse to start a war. They were pushing for conflict to serve their own strategic interests. They saw humanity as a threat, a growing force in the galaxy, and war was the easiest way to keep humanity in check. But Marcus had already uncovered the heart of their plan: manipulation, control, and the systematic use of chaos to shift the balance of power. He wasn't about to let them succeed. He'd been in wars before, and he knew how they unfolded. Small incidents turned into full-scale massacres. But Marcus had another weapon at his disposal: information. He knew that, while the Council members were powerful, they were also fractured, each with their own ambitions and insecurities. The Zarthians might have the loudest voice, but Marcus had already started to turn the tide. He could feel it in the subtle changes around him. Some Council members were beginning to listen, questioning the motives behind the Zarthians' call for war. Marcus knew that this wasn't a matter of appeasing the Zarthians with words. They were beyond that. He had to expose them for what they truly were. He needed to reveal the larger conspiracy that was being hidden in plain sight. The war wasn't a question of justice. It was about a power grab. The Zarthians, along with a few others in the Council, saw this conflict as a chance to reshape the galaxy to their advantage. The Zarthian representative, Zarnak, could sense the shift. He was becoming more agitated, his gaze flicking nervously between Marcus and the other Council members. He had been too confident, too sure of himself. Marcus could see the cracks in his composure, and he wasn't about to let this moment slip away. "I see you're trying to manipulate this situation," Marcus said, his voice steady but cutting through the growing murmur in the chamber. "But let's be clear, this isn't about justice. This is about power. You want war because it serves your interests. You want to create chaos so you can expand your influence." Zarnak shot him a venomous look, but Marcus pressed on. "You've used humanity's mistake as a catalyst for something much larger. You want to weaken us, but more than that, you want to control the outcome. You want to steer this war in a direction that benefits only a few. The truth is, this isn't about us. It's about you." A stunned silence fell over the room. Some of the other Council members exchanged wary glances, unsure how to respond. Marcus's words had struck deep, and now they could see the truth of what he was suggesting. The Zarthians weren't merely defending their sacred ground, they were using this incident as a pretext for a much larger agenda. Marcus knew that if he didn't act quickly, the Zarthians would rally the others and dismiss his accusations as baseless. He needed to put the pieces together, to lay out the truth for all to see. He began to weave the narrative, connecting the dots between the Zarthians' actions and the strategic moves they had been making for years. Their manipulation of the Council, their insistence on war, their desire to push humanity into submission. This was all part of a larger, calculated plan to tip the balance of power in their favor. The council members, many of whom had been silent up until now, began to murmur among themselves. Some were clearly uncomfortable with what Marcus was suggesting, while others seemed to be considering his words more carefully. The Zarthians, once the driving force behind the war, were now on the defensive. They could no longer deny the truth Marcus had uncovered. He had revealed their motives, and now, they were struggling to maintain their control. Marcus didn't let up. He knew that exposing the Zarthians' role wasn't enough. He had to convince the rest of the council to abandon the war agenda altogether. He needed to shift the focus away from the accusation of human aggression and onto the true threat, the Zarthians and their manipulation of the situation. It wasn't just about stopping the war. It was about ensuring that the council understood that this conflict was being manufactured for selfish purposes. "I'm not here to defend humanity," Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. "I'm here to defend the truth. And the truth is that we don't need a war. We need honesty, transparency, and cooperation. We need to confront the real issue, the corruption within this council that seeks to undermine the will of its members for the sake of power. If we don't recognize that, then we will all fall victim to those who seek to control us." There was a shift in the room. The neutral factions of the council, the ones who had remained silent through the initial demands for war, were beginning to see the bigger picture. The Zarthians had been playing the council for fools, using their influence to push a war they didn't need, all for the sake of personal gain. But now, Marcus had made it clear, the war wasn't just a question of human mistakes, it was a question of control. And the council had to decide if it would continue to be manipulated or if it would stand up to those who sought to exploit them. Zarnak, once so confident, was now visibly rattled. His eyes darted nervously around the room as the realization dawned. The truth was out, and the Zarthians no longer held the power they once did. The council had started to turn on them, and there was little Zarnak could do to stop it. The game was over. Marcus knew the final decision was still to come, but he could already feel the momentum shifting in his favor. The council was no longer united in their demand for war. The Zarthians had lost their grip on the situation, and the other factions were beginning to question their motives. The vote that had once seemed inevitable was no longer a foregone conclusion. The war would not happen, not today, not under these circumstances. The last whispers of dissent died down as Marcus took a final look at the council. He had done it. The war was averted. Humanity had been saved, not through force, but through the power of diplomacy, the power of truth. Marcus had exposed the lies and manipulation, and in doing so, had protected the future of humanity in the galaxy. The silence in the chamber was deafening. The council had been shaken, and Marcus had emerged victorious. This was a turning point for humanity. The galaxy would no longer see them as a naive, primitive race. They had stood up to the galaxy's powers and won, and the ripple effect of this victory would be felt for years to come. The Zarthians may have tried to manipulate the situation, but Marcus had outsmarted them, showing the galaxy that humanity could think outside the box, could fight with its wits and intellect, not just its strength. And for that, humanity had earned its place among the stars. The room had grown quiet, the tension now palpable as the weight of Marcus's words hung in the air. The Galactic Council, once unified in their demand for war, was now visibly fractured. The powerful Zarthians, who had been at the forefront of the demand for retaliation, were beginning to retreat, their once confident demeanor now marred by the realization that their manipulative schemes were no longer hidden. The council members, who had been so quick to call for action, now found themselves caught between their long-standing allegiances and the truth Marcus had uncovered. Marcus stood tall, the faintest hint of weariness in his eyes. His mission was far from over, but the tide had shifted. He could sense the underlying unease rippling through the chamber, the sense that war was no longer a certain outcome. The Zarthians were no longer the driving force. The council was in disarray, and Marcus knew this was his moment to drive the final point home. Humanity's future in the galaxy was hanging by a thread, but the thread was fraying in his favor. "Let's not forget," Marcus spoke again, his voice low but clear. What is at stake here? This isn't just about an incident or a mistake made in ignorance. This is about something much larger, a fight for control, a fight for power. The truth is, the Council has been manipulated by certain factions, and if we don't recognize this now, we will all regret it. His eyes swept across the room, catching the gaze of key Council members who had remained silent until now. We are being pushed into a war that we don't need, that we don't want. A war that serves no one except those who seek to control the galaxy by creating chaos. His words were met with silence, but it wasn't the dead silence that had filled the room before. This time, there was contemplation, a deep understanding starting to settle among the Council members. Some of them looked unsettled, while others seemed to be evaluating the implications of what he was saying. The skepticism that had initially plagued the room was giving way to genuine doubt. You would have us believe this was a carefully orchestrated plot? Zarnak, the Zarthian representative, spat. His voice was tight with frustration, but the defensiveness was unmistakable. You think you can manipulate us with your rhetoric? I'm not manipulating anyone, Zarnak, Marcus replied, his voice firm, cutting through the venom in Zarnak's words. I'm showing you the truth. The Zarthians have long played both sides, and now, they're using this incident to further their own agenda. You can pretend it's about justice all you want, but the reality is simple. The Zarthians want this war because it benefits them. He paused, letting the words sink in. And it benefits them alone. Zarnak bristled, his fingers flexing with barely contained rage, but Marcus could see the cracks in the Zarthians' facade. The others in the room were no longer focused solely on humanity's supposed transgressions. The debate had taken a sharp turn, and now it was less about the violation and more about the larger conspiracy that Marcus had unearthed. The Zarthians were losing their grip on the narrative, and they knew it. The atmosphere had changed. The other members of the Council, those who had been silent or neutral before, were now starting to react. Some were nodding, as though considering the possibility that Marcus was right. The factions that had pushed for war were now questioning their positions, and some of the more diplomatic races seemed genuinely disturbed by the revelations Marcus had laid bare. What's more, Marcus continued, this war wouldn't just destroy humanity. It would destroy us all. The Zarthians are playing a dangerous game, using war as a smokescreen to manipulate the outcome of this entire council. If you let them win, the galaxy will be at their mercy. We will be at their mercy. The room was growing more agitated, but it was no longer a simple, unified call for war. The Zarthians had been outed, and the factions that had been blindly following their lead now found themselves questioning their motivations. Marcus had put them on the defensive, and now the council was looking inward. Some, once eager to see humanity punished, were now reconsidering their stance. You ask us to trust you? Zarnak's voice was icy. After all that has transpired, you expect us to just let this go? I'm not asking you to trust me, Marcus said, meeting Zarnak's glare without flinching. I'm asking you to trust the truth. This council, this galaxy, can be a place where we build alliances, where we stand together against forces that would seek to divide us. But we can't do that if we allow ourselves to be manipulated by those who are only interested in their own power. The council was silent now, but it was a different kind of silence, one filled with uncertainty, hesitation, and perhaps, just maybe, the spark of realization. The debate was no longer about war, it was about the future. And Marcus, despite the overwhelming odds, had managed to steer the conversation in the direction of peace. The Zarthians were scrambling, but their words now seemed hollow. The weight of Marcus's arguments had struck too deep. The council could no longer ignore the truth they had been blind to. Marcus had exposed the hypocrisy, the manipulation, and the hidden motives. And in doing so, he had set the stage for peace. Humanity, Marcus continued, has shown time and again that we can adapt. We've learned from our mistakes, and we've learned to build. This is the moment for us to prove that we can do more than just survive in this galaxy. We can thrive, and we can do so together. The room was still, but the silence was no longer oppressive. It was thoughtful. And then, one by one, the murmurs began. A few council members spoke up, voicing their support for Marcus's call for peace. Others remained silent, but the momentum was unmistakable. The council was divided no longer. The war they had once been so sure of was no longer a certainty. The final vote came swiftly, but it was clear. The council had rejected the call for war. Zarnak and his allies had failed. The conspiracy had been uncovered, and the truth had won. As the chamber began to clear, Marcus felt the weight of the moment. The fight was over, but the victory wasn't just his, it was humanity's. This was a turning point for the human race. The galaxy, once filled with skepticism and doubt toward them, had seen that humanity was capable of standing up against manipulation, capable of seeing the bigger picture. Marcus's victory wasn't just political, it was a triumph of intellect, resilience, and the unwavering resolve of the human spirit. Humanity had earned its place among the stars, and the galaxy would remember this day, the day when the human diplomat had stood alone against the might of the Galactic Council and won.